Welcome everyone to the Vancouver Datajam. We're very excited to have you here today, and I am particularly excited to share with you this video that May Masoud, Advisory in Data Sciences from SAS, has put together. I'll start off by doing a land acknowledgement and acknowledge that our team, the Vancouver Datajam team, resides and shared knowledge in the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We learn and benefit from one another, and as we work towards understanding, it's important that we recognize and acknowledge our own role within the current landscape. And I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for today, May Masoud. Her talk is going to be Making AI Responsible. May Masoud is a data science advisor at SAS Canada, trained in classical statistics and modern machine learning. She helps Canadian organizations design their artificial intelligence strategy and technology mix. Her focus is on deriving measurable return on AI investments while maintaining enterprise governance and ethical considerations. May developed her technical foundation through a degree in statistics and economics. Following that, she advanced her analytics toolkit with a master's of business analytics from the Schulich School of Business. This cocktail of technical and business expertise has shaped May as an analytics practitioner and as a thought leader. Outside of her client engagements, May invests her time delivering keynotes and workshops for business and academic communities. A large focus of these efforts is on topics such as ethics of AI and democratizing analytics. And as a sneak peek, some of the questions that we prepared for May prior to her talk include the following. Question 1. What steps can early career data scientists take to ensure we develop ethical algorithms? Question 2, what things can we do both as citizens and as professionals to push for changes in legislation and usage of artificial intelligence with decisions that impact human lives? Question 3, how to determine whether the algorithms we develop are unethical or unfair? Question 4, how do we define an unfair or unethical AI? Question 5, how can we incorporate Indigenous perspectives into AI in data science? And question 6, what organizations pushing for fair AI and machine learning exist that we can join efforts with? So with that, I'll pass it over to Jasmine, who will play May's recording and talk prepared based on our questions.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for bringing your curiosity to this session. We're going to talk about ethics and responsibility in artificial intelligence. I will talk both about the why and the how. So for the former, I'd like to start with a story. Between the years 2013 and 2015, the state of Michigan's data automated system, which they were calling MIDAS, falsely accused more than 40,000 people of fraudulently claiming unemployment benefits. So I'll let you take that in. Over 40,000 people who claimed unemployment benefits were wrongfully accused of fraud. Not because of a glitch in the system, but because how the algorithm was designed. And this algorithm was also designed to automatically charge people with misrepresentation and demand repayment from them. So what the state did was the state automatically started trimming away wages and tax returns as repayment for this alleged fraud. Now, given the large number of victims, this disaster got a lot of media coverage and there were calls for investigation, which, by the way, are still ongoing till this day. But aside from the loss of trust, integrity, and basically an investment gone down the drain for the state, the impact that this had on the victims was something that cannot be undone. The victims suffered, as you can imagine, damaged credit. They suffered lost job opportunities. Some lost their homes, and many even filed for bankruptcy. Some even pushed to suicide. Now, I want you to think for a moment about the socioeconomic makeup of these victims. Who does this group consist of? This is a group that's already disadvantaged. They are claiming unemployment benefits. They are already a vulnerable part of society. You know, many of them don't even have the means to fight back something like this and vindicate themselves. And even those who did fight back and were cleared in court didn't receive their refunds right away. So till this day, The victims are suffering. Until this day, the story is active, and we are seeing the ripple effects of this disaster in that geography. So when I think of the story, there are two questions that spring up almost immediately. Number one, what could have been done differently? And number two, who should we hold accountable? The state, the developers, the AI itself? Well, I'll answer both these questions, but I will start with artificial intelligence. So AI application in business promises massive, massive value, somewhere around $2.9 trillion, according to Gartner. Every organization wants a piece of that pie, hence all the buzz for the past few years. But the promise is real. The promise for business from AI is real. AI does generate value. It's no secret. But let's take a look at what AI really is. AI is just a piece of intelligent software that learns from historical data, data that we humans generate, data that is often flawed and biased just as we are. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that when a machine adopts those biases and that problematic behavior, and that machine now makes decisions at scale, impacting millions of lives, then it becomes a systemic problem. Because look at the type of decisions that are being made by AI. Since 2016, majority of resumes are screened entirely by computers. Fraud detection, loan provisioning, even some judicial decisions are leveraging AI. And these decisions, they impact not just individuals, but they also impact the fabric of our society. So that makes AI a system of power. And with all systems of power, we must hold it accountable. The good news is that we are trying. Ethical AI, trustworthy AI, responsible AI, fair AI, whatever you want to call it, all these semantics are testament to the global conversation that's happening right now. Ethical AI is almost being treated as a new green. It's becoming a core value for organizations. It's becoming a priority for regulators and policymakers, as it should. But I'll say this, ethics is not the same as pure compliance. Yes, regulations are catching up, and that's great, and we're going through reform, but complying with regulations is different from acting ethically and acting from a place of responsibility. Despite regulatory reform, organizations still carry that responsibility to ensure that their design and use of AI is in fact ethical. Because while AI promises all this glorious value and all this competitive advantage to the business, there's another side of that coin. And the other side of that coin is ethics and responsibility that's attached to your use of AI. You cannot sustain the left-hand side without considering the right-hand side. When you read all these horror stories of AI gone wrong or evil guy AI or organizations facing lawsuits and penalties for all these unintended consequences of AI, those are all examples of organizations neglecting one side of the coin in pursuit of the other side of the coin. So far, I've talked about the why of ethical AI. Why do we need it? Why is it important? Let's talk about the how. But first, let me just say, ethics is a philosophical concept, and I don't believe that we can ever fully agree on the right and wrong of things, and we're not going to try to. But what we should do is bring a sense of responsibility and a sense of accountability to what we as data scientists do. Now, granted, we only play one part in the full ethical AI framework, but we do play a very important part. So let me bring you to a familiar landscape, the model ops landscape. This is, as you probably know, the behind the scenes of AI development and implementation. Basically, you're looking at the life cycle of developing and deploying AI assets. And it starts from the left-hand side with a question or a problem statement that the AI will address. This problem statement could be loan provisioning, it could be fraud detection, it could be an upsell campaign, whatever problem we're solving for. The real work starts with data on the left-hand side. This is where data prep, data engineering, basically all data operations happen. We do all that, and then we come to the middle zone, This is where the analytic models are developed. This is where you compare your models, you pick the best performing ones, or champions if you call them, and then we push them to the right-hand side. That's where they get deployed. That's where they get turned into actual business decisions. But it doesn't end there, right? Because now these assets that are in production, that we're making decisions on, they need to constantly be monitored to make sure that they are in fact behaving as expected, that they are still performing well. And if they degrade, which they do, the loop brings them back to the middle to retune them, to fix them. The loop also takes new data and new insights back to the left-hand side to enrich our initial data sources. So this is a life cycle, and this model ops life cycle ensures that high-quality assets are developed and deployed quickly and efficiently, of course, with the help of automation. But when we talk about ethical AI, we need to implement ethical AI frameworks across this life cycle. Ethical AI doesn't just happen at one place. It happens throughout this life cycle. Ethical AI considerations trickle down to every part of this loop. For AI as a whole to be ethical, it first needs to be ethical in its parts. So let's break it down. Let's start with data. At the data stage, we need to ensure that we have evaluated the integrity of the data. We have explored any biases that exist in our training data, that we've corrected that, and we've derived an appropriate feature set or an appropriate input set that we're going to train our models on. At this stage, we also consider other data quality and privacy issues. For example, are we masking PII data? Personally identifiable data? Are we creating proxies for sensitive variables? Are we flagging them for security? That all happens in the data stage. Then we move into development stage. So this is where we now evaluate the models for bias. Earlier, we checked to see if the data inherently was biased. Now we're asking if the model design is biased. And this is why we push for diversity in data science teams, and we push for peer collaboration, because developer bias is a very real thing. Us humans, we've got our blind spots, and the way to offset a personal blind spot is by working in diverse teams, peer reviewing, collaborating. Another requirement at this stage is transparency and explainability. So, can we explain how this model is generating results? Can we easily explain these results and these decisions to all stakeholders? I'm not just talking about the technical folks, I'm not just talking about the data scientists, but can we explain it to all stakeholders, including regulators, including customers? Those are the considerations at the development stage. Then we come to this stage. The model is out in production, and now there is a need to monitor its performance, specifically fairness of the decisions that we're taking. We need to take a look at the demographic that we're serving. We need to ensure that our decisioning is not negatively impacting a vulnerable or a disadvantaged population segment. The last point I'll make here is about end-to-end governance and lineage. A decision that's taking place on the right-hand side should be able to be traced back through these stages all the way to the data it was trained on, and all the stages it underwent along the way. So there's that need for transparency of the process as well. So bear in mind that this is not the full picture. I'm just showing you the technology or the data science perspective, and technology is just one part of the equation. Ethical AI also has other requirements with regards to the people involved, the processes, organizational culture. So let's talk about those. In addition to making the technology robust and fair, which I just showed you, we also need to do other things. We need to foster AI literacy. It is so important for everybody in an AI-enabled organization to at least have a basic understanding of good data practice and a complete understanding of what the organization's ethical mandate is. That note, have an ethical charter or a code of conduct specific to AI use and design. People cannot uphold values if those values have not been defined. Earlier, I also mentioned diversity, and I cannot stress this enough. Adopt all sorts of diversity to account for ethical blind spots. Create that culture of collaboration and peer review, because a problem that's not so obvious to one person may be more obvious to somebody else. So whether it's the data science team or your ethics committee, a variety of voices need to sit at those tables. And lastly, despite all the measures you may take, mistakes happen, errors happen. Anticipate them. Leave room for error and remediation. Have a process in place so that path from mistake to remedy can be optimized. It can be shortened. So my parting thought to you would be, do not underestimate the role you, the people, play in AI landscape. Accountability will always be attributed to us humans, even when technology goes wrong. So let's at least be aware of the part we play. So with that, I'm going to go into some questions from you all. These are very, very thoughtful questions, and thank you for sending them. Given the overlap between the topics that you all brought up, I will answer them in a discussion style rather than question by question. So the first question, or the first topic was, what steps can early career data scientists take to ensure that we develop ethical algorithms? Well, be informed. Be informed on 3 fronts. Number 1, know the scope of your work. Ask about your organization's ethics mandate. Know the use case you're working on inside and out. Ask, what problem are we solving for? And in what capacity will this AI be used? Be informed about the population that your work will be serving. Are you building an AI that will serve unemployed folks, particularly vulnerable folks? Will it be serving a segment of the population that is made up of marginalized communities? Be considerate of those sensitivities as you design. If your manager and your team are not talking about it, start the conversation. Number 2, be informed about the latest techniques. Analytics can help analytics. So be up to date on latest fairness techniques like equalized odds and counterfactual fairness testing. There are some really good tests out there, and there are even more that are being researched. So stay on top of that. And number 3, be present in the AI community. Anywhere where there is a conversation on ethics or responsibility of AI, be present. And if there isn't a conversation happening around you, start it. If you're a data scientist, this directly impacts your work and the future of your work. So be informed. The second topic was around the definition of fairness. How can we determine whether the AI or the algorithms we developed are unethical or unfair? This is a loaded question, but a critical one, because you're asking, how do we define fairness? Well, as individuals, what we consider to be fair depends on our personal values and perspectives. So when we scale it up to organizations, now the organization first needs to define what their values and their ethics charter or mandate is and make that visible to all stakeholders so everybody across the board knows what they're working with. Now, in addition to that, in addition to just having that value or that charter, there needs to also be a mathematical, a more quantifiable definition of fairness. And that takes a little bit more work. This is where you sit down as a team and evaluate which fairness metrics you're going to use to test your algorithms. And even before that, how will you evaluate bias in your data sources? And the criteria will vary depending on what problem you're trying to solve and the population you're serving. For example, the ethical criteria for a medical diagnosis will look very different from loan decisioning AI, which will look very different from insurance claim decisioning. So if you're serving a geography that mainly consists of one type of demographic versus are you serving a geography that contains a more diverse demographic subset, that also impacts the type of metrics that you'll employ. Then you can ask yourself, should I employ group fairness and aim to treat all groups equally when I know that one of my groups is incomparably disadvantaged and needs extra protection? So those are the type of questions to ask when you're defining a specific criteria. Another thing to keep in mind is that fairness is a function of time. The criteria you set today may not pass the test of time. So create a process where the criteria is reevaluated by a diverse committee every so often to ensure that it's still appropriate. Which brings me to the last consideration, diversity. Once again, stand back and look at the makeup of your teams. The teams that are developing and deploying and governing AI assets. Do these teams contain appropriate diversity? Do we have enough representation from gender spectrum, from various ethnic backgrounds, from various life experiences and life stages? If the answer is no, then at least acknowledge that you may be prone to designing unfair AI. And at this point, I'll incorporate another question I received, which is, how can we incorporate Indigenous perspectives into AI and data science? I love this question, and I would love to hear more from whomever asked this question, because something tells me there's more to this question. But for now, I can say, let the community speak for itself. Give them a seat at the table. Let them tell you what they need and what they're missing. Let them sit on your ethics committee. Let them contribute to your AI development. We don't have to assume and play the mystery game when you can hear it from the source. And the last topic of questions is around action. What things can we do? What can we do both as citizens and as professionals to push for changes in legislation and usage of AI with decisions that impact human lives? Also, what is being pushed for fair AI that we can join efforts with? Well, that's good. That's a very good question. I think there are several ways to contribute. My focus today has been on the organization side of things and what we as individual contributors and leaders do within our organizations. But outside of your organization, there's still many ways to help and contribute to the development of good AI practices. I would ask you to look within your network and within your reach first. I've noticed that almost all big universities have some sort of a research arm that's focusing on responsible ethical AI. If you're a student, you can seek out those groups and participate that way. Perhaps you can still participate even as an alumni. It's worth reaching out to your school to see how you can contribute to those efforts. But another avenue is also to seek out organizations that are developing policies and frameworks for ethical AI. One example I can give is Partnership on AI, also known as PAI, which is a nonprofit effort. There's also the Responsible Artificial Intelligence Institute that's taken efforts to make AI more responsible, more ethical. You can always contact such groups. You can also look to the technology vendors your organization has partnered with. For example, if you use SAS at your job, you can always reach out to your SAS contacts and know and ask how you can collaborate, how we can collaborate to make your AI more responsible and more ethical. All of these avenues are valid. If you want to help, there are always ways to help. So I hope I've done justice to your questions. If you'd like to continue the conversation with me, feel free to reach out. But for now, have yourselves a great weekend.
Well, we're very grateful to May for preparing an answer to our questions. And before I finish up the keynote session for today, I'll just do an acknowledgement to all the organizations that supported our event and made this possible. And then I'll let you go and get ready for your next round of workshops. Okay, so I would very much like to thank all of our sponsors for this year, Simon Fraser University and SASA, CANSI, Pacific Institute for the Mathematical Sciences, BCAT Center of Excellence in Analytics, powered by SAP, the Python Software Foundation, SAS, and Procogia. This also wouldn't be possible without the support of our project partners, Simon Fraser University, Department of Indigenous Studies, Vancouver Island Health Authority, BCAT, and Pio Ladies Tunis. And of course, this wouldn't be possible without the effort of our community partners, Athena Pathways, SFU Library, Notable, Plumer, First Nations Technology Council, DataCan, ISAAC, and Data for Good Vancouver. We hope this was an enjoyable keynote session for you, and we're very much looking forward to your work this week. Enjoy the rest of your workshops, and I'll see you soon.